The rain-soaked streets of San Francisco shimmered under the streetlights. But I barely noticed as I sprinted toward the bookstore, my heart hammering louder than the storm. I was late again, and the thought of Elias waiting, his quiet disappointment cutting deeper than any words, made my chest ache. By the time I burst through the glass doors of bound pages, I was breathless, dripping wet, and certain I'd ruined everything. The bookstore was a warm haven, shelves towering with stories that smelled of ink and dreams. Elias stood near the poetry section, his slender frame leaning against a wooden shelf, a worn journal tucked under his arm. His auburn hair caught the soft light, and his hazel eyes flicked up to meet mine. For a moment, the world still just him, me, and the weight of something unsaid. "You're soaked, Caleb," he said, his voice low, teasing, but with that edge of concern that always unraveled me. He stepped closer, brushing a damp strand of hair from my forehead. His touch lingered, and I swear my heart forgot how to beat. I'd known Elias for 3 months, ever since I stumbled into this bookstore looking for a distraction from my crumbling life. At 24, I was a mess fresh out of a toxic relationship, barely holding down a barista job, and living in a shoebox apartment in the Mission District. Elias, 26, was different. He was a poet, a dreamer, with a quiet strength that made me want to be better. But he was also a secret I wasn't ready to face. "Sorry," I mumbled, shaking water from my jacket. Traffic was a nightmare. He smiled, that half smile that made my stomach flip. "You're here now? That's what matters." We'd been meeting here every Friday since that first chance encounter, when he'd recommended a dog-eared copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I'd bought it just to keep him talking. Now, those Friday nights were my lifeline hours spent debating books, stealing glances, and pretending I didn't feel the pull of something deeper. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, like the city itself was holding its breath. "Caleb," Elias said, his voice softer now, "there's something I need to tell you." My pulse spiked. I wanted to interrupt, to crack a joke and dodge whatever was coming. But his eyes held me captive. They were searching, vulnerable, and I knew this was the moment everything could change. Before he could speak, the bookstore's overhead lights flickered, and a sharp crack of thunder rattled the windows. The crowd inside stirred, murmuring about the storm. Elias grabbed my hand, his grip firm, urgent, and pulled me toward the back of the store, where a narrow staircase led to a reading nook tucked under the eaves. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere quiet." The nook was cramped, lined with mismatched cushions and fairy lights that cast a warm glow. We sat close, our knees brushing, and I could feel the heat of him even through my damp clothes. My mind raced. Was he about to confess something? Was I ready to hear it? I'd spent so long hiding who I was, first from my conservative family in Ohio, then from myself. Coming out wasn't just a word. It was a cliff I wasn't sure I could leap from. Elias opened his journal, revealing pages filled with his jagged handwriting. "I wrote something for you," he said, his fingers trembling slightly as he handed it to me. "Read it, please." I took the journal, my hands unsteady. The words blurred at first, but as I read, they sharpened into something raw and beautiful, a poem about two souls meeting in the chaos of a city, about longing that burned brighter than fear. It was us, laid bare, and it terrified me as much as it thrilled me. "Elias," I started, my voice cracking. "This is—" "Don't say anything yet," he interrupted, his eyes locked on mine. "Just feel it." I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But the weight of my past-off shame, of doubt, of a father who'd called me broken pressed down on me. I handed the journal back, my throat tight. I don't know if I can do this. His face fell, but he didn't look away. Caleb, I see you. All of you. And I'm not going anywhere. Those words broke something in me. I wanted to believe him, to let myself fall into whatever this was. But fear was a louder voice. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from my ex, Ryan, the one who'd left me bruised in more ways than one. We need to talk. Now. I froze, the past crashing into the present. Elias noticed, his brow furrowing. What's wrong? Nothing. I lied, shoving the phone deeper into my pocket. But the damage was done. The moment was gone, and I was left with the sinking feeling that I'd just pushed away the one person who might actually see me. We sat in silence, the storm raging outside, and I wondered if I'd ever be brave enough to say the words I felt but couldn't speak. Elias deserved someone whole, someone unafraid. And I wasn't sure that was me. The storm didn't let up, and neither did the knot in my chest. Elias and I left the bookstore, stepping into the rain-slicked streets, our silence heavier than the clouds above. I wanted to explain why I'd pulled away, why Ryan's text had rattled me, but the words stuck like wet leaves to pavement. We ducked into a diner across the street, a retro joint with neon signs and cracked vinyl booths. The smell of coffee and fried onions hit me as we slid into a corner booth, the fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows on Elias's face. He looked at me, waiting, but I couldn't meet his eyes. Caleb, he said finally, his voice gentle but firm. You don't have to tell me everything. But don't shut me out. I stared at the menu, its laminated edges curling from years of use. How could I explain Ryan? 2 years of my life spent with someone who charmed me, then chipped away at me until I doubted my own worth. I'd left him 6 months ago, but his shadow lingered, creeping into moments like this one. It's my ex, I admitted, my voice barely audible over the diner's hum. He texted me. Wants to meet. Elias's jaw tightened, but he didn't push. Instead, he reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. You don't owe him anything. You know. I nodded, but the truth was messier. Ryan had been my first real relationship, the first person I'd let in after years of denying who I was. He'd made me feel seen, then used that against me. And now, with Elias sitting across from me, his quiet strength pulling me like gravity, I was terrified of repeating the same mistake. The waitress interrupted, setting down 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Elias thanked her with that easy warmth of his, then turned back to me. What do you want? Caleb. Not him. You. The question hit like a punch. What did I want? Freedom from my past. A life where I didn't flinch at my own reflection. Or maybe just Elias, with his poetry and his unwavering gaze, who made me feel like I could be enough. I don't know, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. I'm trying to figure it out. He leaned back, his scarf slipping to reveal the edge of a tattoo on his collarbone, a small, inked feather. When I came out, he said, my family didn't speak to me for a year. I thought I'd lost everything. But I found people who saw me for who I am. You deserve that too. His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I wanted to be brave like him, to live without apology, but fear was a chain I hadn't broken. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. What if I'm not ready? Then I'll wait, he said simply, his eyes never leaving mine. The diner door swung open, and a gust of cold air swept in. My phone buzzed again, another text from Ryan. I'm outside. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. My stomach dropped. I glanced out the window, and there he was, leaning against a lamppost, his silhouette sharp against the rain. Elias followed my gaze. Is that him? I nodded, my hands clenching into fists. I should talk to him. Get it over with. Elias's expression darkened, but he didn't argue. I'll be here, he said, his voice steady. You don't have to do this alone. I stood, my legs shaky, and stepped outside. The rain was relentless, soaking me instantly. Ryan looked the same tall, blonde, with that disarming smile that had once fooled me. Caleb, he said, stepping closer. You look good. What do you want? I asked, keeping my distance. He shrugged, his smile fading. I miss you. I messed up. Okay. I want to fix things. His words were a trap, familiar and dangerous. I glanced back at the diner, where Elias sat watching, his journal open on the table. In that moment, I saw two paths, one back to Ryan, to the pain I knew, and one toward Elias, towards something terrifyingly new. I'm done fixing things with you, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Don't contact me again. Ryan's face hardened, but before he could respond, I turned and walked back to the diner, my heart pounding. Elias stood as I approached, concern etched into his features. Without thinking, I grabbed his hand, pulling him outside into the rain. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I'm scared, but I don't want to lose Thysis. Elias's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, the rain streaming down his face. You won't, he whispered, and for the first time, I believed him. The rain didn't stop, and neither did the tremor in my hands as I stood with Elias outside the diner, our clothes clinging to us like second skins. His hand was still in mine, warm despite the cold, and I clung to it like a lifeline. I just walked away from Ryan, but the weight of that choice felt like it could crush me. Caleb, Elias said, his voice cutting through the storm. You're shaking. I laughed, a brittle sound. Yeah, well, telling your ex to get lost in a downpour will do that. He didn't laugh back. Instead, he pulled me under the awning of a closed shop, shielding us from the worst of the rain. His scarf was soaked, the colors bleeding together, but his eyes were steady, searching mine. You did the right thing, he said. You know that, right? I wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at me. Ryan had been my world for so long, even when it hurt. Letting go felt like betraying a part of myself, even if it was the part that kept me small. What if I'm not strong enough to do this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Elias's hand tightened around mine. You're stronger than you think. You just faced him. That's not nothing. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the way his jaw clenched with quiet determination, the way his eyes held a fire I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just the soft-spoken poet I'd met. He was someone who'd fought his own battles and come out whole. It made me want to be brave, even if I didn't know how. We started walking, our steps slow, the city blurring around us. San Francisco was alive despite the storm taxis honking, neon signs flickering, people rushing under umbrellas. Elias led me down a side street toward his apartment, a small walk-up in no valley he'd mentioned once but never invited me to. You need to get out of those wet clothes, he said, glancing at me. And I make 'em mean hot chocolate. I managed to smile. You're bribing me with cocoa. Is it working? Maybe. His apartment was small but warm, with books stacked on every surface and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. It smelled like lavender and old paper, and it felt like him safe, alive, unapologetic. He handed me a towel and one of his sweaters, a soft green thing that smelled faintly of cedar. I changed in his tiny bathroom, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't name. When I came out, Elias was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of hot chocolate. The sight of him, hair still damp, sleeves rolled up, humming softly, made something in me ache. I wanted this, I realized. Not just him, but this feeling of being seen, of being enough. We sat on his couch, mugs in hand, the storm a distant rumble now. Tell me about Ryan, Elias said, not pushing, just asking. If you want. I took a deep breath, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I told him about Ryan's charm, how it had pulled me in, and how it had turned controlling, manipulative. I told him about the nights I'd spent questioning myself, wondering if I deserved better. And I told him about the fear that still lingered, the fear that I wasn't ready for someone like Elias, someone who saw me so clearly. He listened, his face unreadable, but his eyes soft. When I finished, he set his mug down and leaned closer. You're not broken, Caleb. You're not defined by him. You're you, and that's enough. My throat tightened, and I felt the sting of tears. I'd spent so long hiding, so long believing I wasn't worth loving, that his words felt like a lifeline. What if I messed this up? I whispered. You won't, he said, his voice fierce. And if you do, we'll figure it out together. He reached for my hand, and this time, I didn't pull away. The space between us felt electric, charged with all the things we hadn't said. I wanted to kiss him, to close the distance, but fear still held me back. Instead, I leaned my head against his shoulder, letting the warmth of him anchor me. We sat like that for a long time, the silence saying more than words could. Outside, the storm began to fade, but inside, something was just beginning. Morning light filtered through Elias's curtains, painting the room in soft golds and pinks. I'd fallen asleep on his couch, his sweater still wrapped around me, and woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of him moving quietly in the kitchen. For the first time in months, I felt safe, like the world wasn't waiting to tear me apart. Elias handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine. Sleep okay? He asked, his voice warm. Better than I have in a while, I admitted, my cheeks heating. I wanted to say more, to tell him how much last night meant, but the words felt too big, too fragile. We spent the morning talking, our conversation weaving through books, dreams, and the little things that made us who we were. Elias told me about his childhood in Seattle, about the poetry slams he'd competed in, and the moment he'd realized he was a quiet revelation at 16, watching a boy play guitar at a school talent show. I told him about Ohio, about the church sermons that had made me feel small, and the art classes that had been my escape. As the hours passed, I felt myself opening up, the walls I'd built starting to crack. But the fear was still there, lurking. What if this was too good to last? What if I wasn't enough for someone like Elias? Around noon, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Ryan. You can't just walk away. We're not done. My stomach twisted, and Elias noticed the shift in my mood. He's not giving up, is he? He said, his voice tight. I shook my head, deleting the message. He doesn't get to control me anymore. Elias nodded, but his eyes were troubled. Let's get out of here, he suggested. Clear your head. We ended up at Golden Gate Park, the air crisp and the paths alive with joggers and families. Elias led me to a quiet spot by a pond, where ducks glided across the water and the city felt far away. We sat on a bench, our shoulders brushing, and for a moment, everything felt possible. I've never done this, I said, staring at the water. Just been with someone like this. Out in the open. Elias turned to me, his expression soft but serious. You don't have to hide, Caleb. Not with me. I wanted to believe him, but the weight of my past was heavy. My family, they'd never accept this. They'd never accept me. He took my hand, his grip steady. Then you build a new family. One that loves you for you. His words hit hard, stirring something deep inside me. I thought about the life I'd left behind, the expectations I'd never meet, and the possibility of something Nawa life where I could be myself, unapologetically. As we walked back through the park, Elias stopped suddenly, pulling me behind a tree. What? I asked, confused. He grinned, a mischievous spark in his eyes. I just wanted to do this, he said, and before I could react, he kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, then deeper, like he was pouring all his hope into it. My heart raced, and for the first time, I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, letting myself feel everything: the fear, the joy, the possibility. When we finally parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. I've wanted to do that for weeks, he whispered. Me too, I admitted, my voice shaky but honest. We stood there, wrapped in each other, the world fading away. But as we walked back to the city, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a voicemail. Ryan's voice, low and threatening. You think you can just move on? I know where you are, Caleb. Fear clawed at me, but Elias's hand in mine kept me grounded. We'll deal with this, he said, his voice firm. Together. I nodded, but deep down, I knew Ryan wasn't done. And I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. The voicemail lingered like a shadow, Ryan's words looping in my mind as Elias and I rode the bus back to his apartment. The city blurred past, a kaleidoscope of lights and faces, but all I could feel was the dread pooling in my stomach. Elias sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on my knee, a quiet reminder that I wasn't alone. You okay? He asked, his voice low so the other passengers wouldn't hear. I nodded, but it was a lie. Ryan's threat wasn't just words, it was a promise. I'd seen his anger before, the way it could flare into something dark and dangerous. The thought of him coming after me, or worse, after Elias, made my chest tight. When we reached his apartment, Elias locked the door behind us, his movements deliberate. Tell me what he said, his eyes searching mine. I played the voicemail, my hands trembling. Ryan's voice filled the room, sharp and venomous. Elias's face hardened, but he didn't flinch. He's trying to scare you, he said when it ended. But he doesn't get to win. I don't know how to stop him, I admitted, sinking onto the couch. He always finds a way to get under my skin. Elias sat beside me, close enough that I could feel his warmth. You stop him by living your life, by not letting him control you anymore. I wanted to believe him, but fear was a familiar weight. I'd spent so long running from my family, from myself, from Ryan, that standing still felt impossible. But Elias's presence, steady and unwavering, made me want to try. Over the next few days, we fell into a rhythm. I stayed at Elias's apartment, avoiding my own in case Ryan showed up. We cooked together, read poetry aloud, and stole kisses in the quiet moments. Each day, I felt a little braver, a little more like the person I wanted to be. But Ryan's shadow never fully left. His texts kept coming, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening, and I knew he wasn't going away. One evening, as we walked back from a poetry reading at a local cafe, Elias stopped me on the sidewalk. I want to take you somewhere tomorrow, he said, his eyes bright with an idea. Somewhere special. Where? I asked, curious despite the knot in my chest. "You'll see," he said, his smile cryptic. "Trust me." The next morning, he drove us out of the city in his beat-up hatchback, the radio playing soft indie tunes. We ended up at a small beach in Marin County, the Pacific stretching out like a promise. The air was sharp with salt, and the waves crashed with a rhythm that felt alive. Elias spread a blanket on the sand, and we sat, our shoulders touching. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said, staring at the horizon. "When I need to remember who I am." I looked at him, the wind tousling his hair, and felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you," I said. "For this. For everything." He turned to me, his expression serious. "Caleb, I'm falling for you. I know it's fast, and I know you're scared, but I need you to know that." My heart stopped, then raced. I'd felt it too, but hearing it out loud made it real. "I'm falling for you too," I whispered, the words terrifying and exhilarating. "But I'm scared I'll hurt you." "You won't," he said, his voice fierce. "We're in this together." We kissed, the ocean roaring around us, and for a moment, I believed we could face anything. But as we drove back to the city, my phone lit up with another message from Ryan. "I saw you at the cafe last night. You and him. This isn't over." Panic surged through me. He was watching us. Elias noticed my expression and pulled over. "What is it?" I showed him the text, my hand shaking. His face darkened, but he took a deep breath. "We need to go to the police," he said. "Get a restraining order. You don't have to live like this." I nodded, but fear clawed at me. Going to the police meant confronting Ryan head-on, something I'd never done. But with Elias beside me, I felt a spark of courage. Maybe, just maybe, I could fight for this for us. The police station was cold, the fluorescent lights harsh against the gray walls. Elias sat beside me as I filled out the paperwork for a restraining order, his presence a quiet anchor. I told the officer everything: Ryan's texts, his threats, the voicemail, the way he'd been watching us. Each word felt like peeling back a layer of shame, but Elias's hand on my shoulder kept me steady. "This is a good step," the officer said, her voice calm but firm. "We'll serve him the order. If he contacts you again, call us immediately." I nodded, but the fear didn't vanish. Ryan wasn't the type to back down, and the thought of him out there, waiting, made my skin crawl. As we left the station, Elias pulled me into a hug, his arms strong around me. "You did it," he whispered. "I'm proud of you." I wanted to feel proud, but all I felt was exposed, like I'd just painted a target on my back. Still, Elias's belief in me was a lifeline, and I clung to it as we walked back to his car. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. No texts from Ryan, no voicemails, no sign of him. I started to hope, to believe that maybe he'd finally let go. Elias and I spent our evenings together, building something fragile but beautiful. We went to poetry slams, danced in his living room to old vinyl records, and talked about a future I was starting to imagine. One night, as we lay on his couch, his head resting on my chest, he traced circles on my arm. "What do you want, Caleb?" he asked, his voice soft. "Not now, but in 5 years, 10. What's your dream?" I hesitated, the question catching me off guard. I'd spent so long surviving, I hadn't dared to dream. But with Elias, I could see a life where I was free, where I painted again, where we built something together. "I want to be happy," I said finally. "With you. I want to make art, live somewhere with a view, and not be afraid anymore." He smiled, his eyes bright. I want that too. With you. For the first time, I let myself believe it was possible. But the next morning, everything changed. I was at work, steaming milk for a latte, when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You think a piece of paper will stop me? Attached was a photo of me and Elias at the beach, our hands intertwined. My heart stopped. Ryan had been there, watching, closer than I'd realized. I called Elias, my voice shaking as I told him about the text. Stay where you are, he said, his tone urgent. I'm coming to you. He arrived at the cafe 20 minutes later, his face pale but determined. We're going back to the police, he said. This ends now. At the station, we showed the officer the text and photo. She frowned, typing something into her computer. We'll escalate this, she said. He's violating the order already. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Elias squeezed my hand. He's staying with me. That night, we stayed up late, the weight of Ryan's threat hanging over us. Elias tried to keep things light, reading me poetry and making me laugh, but I could see the worry in his eyes. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I didn't want to drag you into this. You didn't drag me anywhere, he said, pulling me close. I'm here because I want to be. Because I love you. The words hit me like a wave. Love. I'd never heard them said with such certainty, such quiet strength. Tears stung my eyes, and I buried my face in his shoulder. I love you too, I whispered, the words raw and true. He held me tighter, his voice soft against my ear. I'm okay. Don't cry, he whispered. But I was crying because I'd finally found real love, and I was terrified of losing it. The days that followed were a blur of vigilance and hope. The police were searching for Ryan, but he'd gone quiet, his silence more unsettling than his threats. Elias and I stayed close, our lives intertwining in ways that felt both fragile and unbreakable. I moved more of my things into his apartment, my paintings leaning against his walls, our books mingling on the shelves. One evening, as we sat on his balcony watching the city lights, Elias handed me a small notebook. For your art, he said. You should start drawing again. I opened it. The blank pages a quiet challenge. I haven't painted in years, I admitted. Not since Ryan told me it was a waste of time. Elias's jaw tightened, but his voice was soft. He was wrong. Your art is part of you. Don't let him take that. I nodded, the notebook heavy in my hands. That night, I sketched for the first time in years a rough outline of Elias's face, his eyes capturing the light. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. A week later, the police called. They'd found Ryan, arrested him for violating the restraining order. He'd been staying in a motel across the city, his phone full of photos of me and Elias. The news should have brought relief, but instead, it left me hollow. He was gone, but the scars he'd left weren't. Elias noticed my quietness and pulled me into the kitchen, where he was baking cookies chocolate chip, my favorite. Talk to me, he said, flour dusted on his cheek. I don't know how to move past this, I admitted. He's gone, but I still feel him. Elias set down the mixing bowl and took my hands. You move past it by living. By choosing joy, even when it's hard. You're stronger than you know. Caleb. His words settled into me, steady and true. I leaned in, kissing him softly, and felt the warmth of a future I could finally see. Months later, we stood in a small gallery in the Mission District, my first art show in years. My paintings lined the walls vibrant, raw, full of the love and fear and hope I'd carried. Elias stood beside me, his hand in mine, his pride radiating. The room was filled with friends we'd made, people who saw us for who we were, not who we'd been told to be. As the night wound down, I pulled Elias outside, the city alive around us. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For believing in me. For loving me." He smiled, his eyes bright with tears. "I'm okay. Don't cry," he whispered. But I was crying because I'd finally found real love. And it was worth every fear, every fight, every moment of doubt. We stood there, wrapped in each other, the city humming with possibility. For the first time, I wasn't running. I was home.